Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our DATIQ Weekly Market Update. This update for August 1st, 2023. I'm Ken Animo, Chief of Analytics over here at DAT, joined by Dean Croak, Principal Industry Analyst. And we picked up the BAT phone yesterday. We needed to get an expert on the phone based on what's going on in the market. So we called Nicole Glenn, founder of Candor Expedite and industry vet, and she was graciously able to join us this morning. Good morning, Nicole.
Okay.
Hi, guys.
Good to have you with us. Thanks for joining on short notice. Appreciate that.
For sure. I always love coming on here and talking to you too.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's been a crazy week, right?
To say the least, it's been a crazy
To say
week.
the least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think since we were on air last week, a top 100 broker and a 99-year-old top 5 trucking company have both went bankrupt. Kind of wild to think about.
Yeah.
Between Surge Transportation and Yellow. So we will talk extensively about this towards the back end of the show. We're going to fly through our market updates so we can bring Nicole back and have a lengthy discussion and answer your questions. I'm anticipating a bunch of questions in the chats and comments. So if you want to go ahead and get those below, if you have questions about recovering freight, where to shift freight volumes, anything like that, feel free to drop it in the chat below and we'll try our best to answer it towards the end of the program here. So, Nicole, we'll see you in a little bit. I'm going to go into our key points of the week. All right. So dry van spot rates down slightly at the end of the month on higher volumes. Contract rates, we have active rates. The rate of decrease is slowing, which is, again, showing signs that we are, in fact, at bottom. Replacement rates turn single digits after a long period of down double digits. I think that the two big stories besides, the trucking companies in danger are these rising fuel prices, really. I mean, we saw back-to-back weeks of, I believe, double digits. It was like a 10 and then a 22-cent increase in fuel prices. And again, on razor-thin margins, especially in the spot market where there's not fuel recapture, that is not a great time. In fact, there really could not be a worse time for fuel prices to start rising in big chunks. So that's something Dean, I'm sure, is going to explore in detail as I turn it over to him for the market update. Dean?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. We'll have a quick market update today. The long-form version of today's market update, including all of the charts, will be posted on our website this evening. Just go to dat.com/market update. So let's quickly go through some of the market dynamics. In the load-to-truck ratio on dry van, end-of-month shipping was up slightly, up about 6% at end of month. Again, no surprise there as carriers and shippers had a little bit more volume to play with. But fewer carriers posted their equipment looking for loads. Again, no surprise there on higher volumes. Load-to-truck ratio up slightly to 2.81. In the refrigerated market, volumes were up last week, boosted by an 8% week-over-week increase in truckload volumes of produce out of California. It's the largest produce state in the nation, pushes out about 30% of weekly volume. That was enough to have an impact on national rates. Load posts are up about 5%, while carrier equipment posts were down 10. Load-to-truck ratio up over 4 to 4.14. In the flatbed market, things are fairly flat last week, literally 64% lower load posts than this time last year, even 36% lower than this time in 2019. Load-to-truck ratio up slightly to 6.79. That's the lowest since 2016 for this time of the year. Having a look at a couple of the markets, the Northeast was a market or a region that was fairly tight for capacity last week. Not big markets in terms of volume. In Maine, capacity has been tightening for the last 3 weeks. Rates are up 17 cents a mile last week to $1.84. Even though at this level, spot rates are still the lowest in 7 years out of Maine. On some of the longer hauls to Phoenix out of Maine, rates are up to about $1.24. Nothing to write home about. At $1.96 a mile, regional loads to Elizabeth, New Jersey out of Maine, still the lowest in 12 months. So not surprising, capacity is pretty tight there as carriers are reluctant to head fairly deep into Maine. Capacity was tight in Massachusetts. Again, not a big market, but rates were up last week about 6 cents a mile. In Springfield, where a lot of the manufacturing occurs, rates are up a penny per mile to $1.43. A lot of the rates out of New England typically are reflecting backhaul markets. It's not a big outbound volume region, which means that head haul lanes typically reflect the lower rates out. So, for example, Allentown to Boston last week was the highest since March at $3.33. A lot of our overnight freight comes from Allentown, Harrisburg. Right, having a look in the refrigeration market, again, we touched on California produce. USDA data shows that produce was up 8% last week in California. Tighter capacity in the two northern Cali markets where produce is sort of peaking at the moment. After dropping for the prior 3 weeks, spot rates in the San Francisco market increased by 2 cents a mile to an outbound average of $2.18. In the larger Fresno market, rates increased by the same amount to $2.21 per outbound load. At $2.50 a mile, outbound California state level rates were up 2 cents a mile last week. And in flatbed, having a look at Texas, where Nicole is from, declining oil and gas drilling rig counts in the Permian Basin in West Texas are having an impact on truckload volumes, particularly out of Houston to Lubbock. At $2.42 a mile, flatbed carriers were paid the lowest in 12 months last week. Since the start of May, outbound flatbed spot rates in Texas have dropped around 18 cents a mile to $2.17 last week. Despite the longer-term downward trend at the state level, some individual markets reported gains last week, such as the larger Houston market. Rates are up 2 cents a mile to $2.25. That's significant. They've been dropping for the prior 3 weeks. And having a look at our year-over-year view of spot rates, even though we saw an increase in volume last week, capacity continued to loosen. Rates were down 2 cents a mile in dry van, down to $1.64. That national average is 31 cents a mile lower than this time last year, but still about 10 cents a mile higher than this time in 2019. In the refrigerated category, rates were flat last week, with national average remaining around $1.97, also 30 cents a mile lower than this time last year. And lastly, in flatbed, after dropping 6 cents a mile in the last 4 weeks, flatbed rates went against trend last week, increasing by just a penny per mile. At $2.05, the national average flatbed rate is 37 cents a mile lower than in 2022, and also identical to this time in 2020. That's it for the market update. Remember, go to dat.com/market update and download the long form version of this report, including all the charts. And with that, it's over to Ken for the short.
Thank you, Dean. So what you're starting to see here is a bit of alignment and then some disagreement. So that's sort of the headline here. And I'll illustrate what this chart means here real quick. So we always start with dry van. The blue line is the historical 7-day weighted moving average. We go back to March to give you some historical context there. It excludes fuel and it's long haul only. So long haul, over the road, full truckload. We have 4 forecasting models, which is hard to say. We have the short term in red. That more, if you pretty much, this is a great example of what the short term model is in this particular scenario, because it very closely tracks near term data, and you can see it's doing just that. The green line is Ratecast. That's our flagship model. It's in all of our core products. And in this particular instance, right until about the end of August, when most of the country's going back to school, it's in alignment with the other models, and then it starts to tick back up. And then you have the gray and yellow lines, which are blends, kind of blended models, both near term and long term. And a lot of those are in pretty much agreement, and then splitting the difference once we get past the late August time period. Going to reefer, it's a little bit more, I'd say, disagreement manifesting sooner. So if we remember, the last chart was right around the end of August. This is, it's pretty much in lockstep agreement for the next 7 to 10 days. And then Ratecast starts to tick back up with the short-term model continuing to trend downward. And then let's take a quick peek at flatbed, probably the most in agreement. The only real difference here being Ratecast has it pulling out of its decline right around the middle of this month, whereas the short-term forecast has it continuing down to that $1.90 per mile, excluding fuel, for long-haul pricing level. Those are the short-term forecasts. In the next couple of weeks, we will grab the long-term forecast. We do that about every month or two, because I think given some of the recent market developments, it'll be really interesting to see what the long-term Ratecast projections are looking like. So with that, we're going to bring Nicole back and go to our question of the week.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So Nicole, let's start off with one of the topics that's been on everyone's mind in the last week in particular. How do you think the impact of Yellow's closure will ripple through the freight industry?
Well, it's kind of hard to say at this point in time because it seems to be an excessive capacity, right? We're hearing that so many, even LTL lines, are looking for additional opportunities. On the expedited side, there is going to be, in my opinion, just a short-term blip up, to capture and get those customers their goods that they need to ship out to get to their clients in a timely manner. So I do see it just, in my opinion, it's really being absorbed into what's happening in the freight market today. And even listening to your updates, I'm going, oh, it just sounds like down, 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 right? So in my mind, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this too, but I see this just not really feeling the pinch and it transitioning in well right now. It's a needed thing that a lot of these companies are looking for this extra business, and here it is to go.
Yeah, I was on the horn with a 30-year vet at a very well-run friend of the show, regional LTL company, and they're just like crazy right now. They, these regionals, especially in some of the better run nationals, they just don't have the slack in the system, and they operate very efficiently, which means they don't have a bunch of capacity laying around. They're swapping out over-the-road trucks for city trucks to handle more pickup and deliveries, to haul more weight. So I think, depending on where the freight's at, most people didn't have an exact map of which freight was yellows and which freight wasn't. So I think there's going to be, to your point, a short-term blip. But again, I want to take the human toll out of it for a second. I think we all agree that's terrible, that 30,000 folks are out of work. But from a market perspective, this could not have happened at a better time to absorb the demand. I mean, $5 billion worth of LTL is no small amount, for sure. But
we did have some customers come to us just asking for the concept of concession planning. Like, what are the different things that we would be able to do, even as a smaller brokerage, to help them build consolidations, whether it's parcel shipping or, per pallet shipping. I'm seeing it a lot more often too, even in the freight forwarding side domestically, that freight forwarders are starting to do their own consolidations of truckload runs across the country and even in the regional markets, and working with these smaller companies, like you said, Ken, to give them that ability to step away from the LTL side. I think what we see in my side of things is clients come to us because we're handling more of the time sensitive or the tailored equipment to handle a shipment. And so a lot of companies are starting to contemplate the idea of damages and claims that they're seeing, and really having more of a strategy around some of this LTL on what they could do to do more load to ride or less stops, less touch runs, if it's something that's consistently happening across the country or region for them. So I think it's an interesting time to even see beyond just the LTL companies absorb this, but some of these other companies, it's a great time to get creative and come up with a way to build your own consolidations that are going to help customers reduce claims, get product there sooner, and show them that it's something that actually can work and it can be cost effective if done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, from a rate perspective, anything over 700-800 miles that's even slightly negative from a freight class perspective is going to be at least feasible to ship full truckload, right? I mean, we're tracking to see what partial volumes are doing in that 7 to 12,000 range, 7 to 12,000 pounds range. And it's certainly up, but it's not up to a shocking degree. So I think, to your point, most folks are consolidating. They're flexing into LTL carriers that have capacity, or they're just holding freight. They're self-consolidating, right? They're just, and this isn't a time where the service requirements are crazy. I mean, fast forward 2 months, I think people would be pulling their hair out. Like, if this happened in late September, early October.
Yes, I agree.
So if you can hold, let's say you're shipping, typically you had 3 pickups a week from Yellow. If you can consolidate, and again, I realize this is very hypothetical. If you can consolidate to maybe just a Monday, Friday pick and do full truckload, that might be something, to think about, because the prices aren't going to, and less risk of damage, right? LTL always has a higher risk of damage given the touch points and the cross-docking and all of that. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be a shipper this week, I would have to say, if I shipped a lot of LTL.
Yeah, I agree with you. But again, I think a lot of them had a warning. We've seen this coming. And like I said, my phone rang several times as an expediter, being approached to not expedite, right? They're just trying to build contingency plans. So I think from what we went through in 2020, 2021, shippers are getting smarter. They're starting to be more looking ahead. And so I think a lot of people had that mindset stepping into this. Any of these issues that's happening, even with what was happening with UPS. It's just, what are we going to do if this happens? And so I watch that more than I've seen it really in my career. And it could be my position now, but at the same time, I normally do not have customers calling me to go, hey, how do we approach this if this happens and this happens, to be proactive and keep our spend down, but also get our customers their goods.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to watch as a shipper, right? You're probably in the throes of getting, like, you don't just send off a request for quote to a large LTL carrier and get it back the same day. I think we all know that. They want to see sample volume and density and freight characteristics and all of that. Typically, I'm assuming they still want to see all that. So let's just say that you were maybe a little late to the party and you decided late last week to send ArcBest, Old Dominion, XPO, and FedEx Freight your data to get some rates back. Probably by late this week, you're going to be fully processing the sticker shock of how much of a price increase you're going to have to take over what Yellow was charging you.
Right. And I'm curious too, because I did read that their rates were significantly lower, but how much lower?
Well, this was like the beauty of marketing, and I love our friends in marketing, like because it's so effective. But they kind of successfully rebranded Yellow as like the low cost carrier, kind of like Southwest and Allegiant and Breeze Airways. Like, they're not cheap with crappy service; they're the low cost carrier.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not be surprised, and this is honestly the truth of what I've been seeing out there. They're not going to look at like 20 to 25% price per pound increases in some, like. The thing you got to realize about Yellow, when I was in that industry, Yellow took a lot of freight from 3PLs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you listen to a lot of 3PLs talk, they were able to price very loosely because they knew they can get on the horn with Yellow and get them to pick up the freight regardless of, they knew they could basically hit any price point.
I can see that.
I think,
yes.
What's from Tiger Cool, Dean? Ted Prince?
Ted Prince, yeah.
He had a great post, which is, I think, really interesting to think about. Given that they had a lot of freight coming from 3PLs, if you decide to go direct to carrier, there will be some price concession because there's a disintermediation effect where you're not going to absorb the broker margin anymore. So I always learn something when he posts, typically, and it was interesting to kind of think about that. So I'm not sure the market as a whole is going to kind of see $5 billion worth of freight priced 20% higher. It may be 7 to 10 when it all washes out.
Right.
But that's not insignificant.
No, it is significant. It's a huge impact to people, and it's great, like you said, for the regional businesses. I mean, these are companies that need that uptick as well. So hopefully it helps many out there. Unfortunately, with the Yellow side of things, like you said, with the employees, it's terrible, to hear that some people didn't get their pensions. I mean, I can't even contemplate that. You've been working your whole life towards something, and it's just this rude awakening. So my heart does go out to those families for sure.
Yeah, so I'm in Akron, Ohio, where the old headquarters of Roadway. Mm-hmm. So you have like largely 3 tranches of people. You have the people who didn't move to Overland Park when they got acquired by Yellow. And then they have a pretty negative opinion of the YRC consolidated brand. And you have the people that went and then got promptly terminated within they basically sucked all their knowledge and threw them away, and they ended up, coming back. They have a very negative opinion of, like, they're the ones that say, what's YRC spelled in reverse, right? That's how they talk about Yellow. Mm-hmm. And then you have the people that went and made a go of it, right? And really stuck around. And I think they have a slightly more nostalgic view of what's going on. I mean, it's a 99-year-old company.
Right.
And then I think you had the added dynamic of who's to blame. Is it management? Is it the unions? Is it both? So I think a lot of that is just background noise to the actual facts on the ground, which is both the union and management are going to have to reckon with the fact that things are moving a lot faster than they were years ago, right? You can't make changes to your operating model based on 5-year contracts. So I think this is a wake-up call to whether you're a union or a non-union shop about how flexible you need to be in responding to changing market conditions. A year from now, you could have to completely shake up your network to stay competitive. And I just think Yellow didn't do that.
I feel like that's going to be a consistent thing that we're seeing. I mean, we really do, as companies, need to consistently look at how we are operating. What value are we significantly bringing to our customers? How do we approach rates proper way and work with our people? And I think some companies kind of just go in autopilot and think, okay, this is fine. But I don't think it matters if you're big or small. You have to stay on the tip of your toes at all times.
And again, this is probably inside baseball for anyone outside of this little freight geek consortium we've built this morning. But if you even think about like LTL companies and how over the last 5 to 10 years they've evolved their line haul strategies, right? So I don't remember the specific numbers, but when I left FedEx Freight, we rolled up under FedEx Freight at Custom Critical for a long time. I mean, that was a huge strategic thing that they talked about externally, was leveraging intermodal, purchase transportation, and their own logo trucks to make a fully optimized line haul network. So it just stood to reason that a lot of the economy stuff that they could slow down was railed or put on purchase tran, and then the higher end priority stuff was put on their own logo trucks to make sure that you were from a damage and service protection perspective. It doesn't seem like Yellow did much of that. I mean, they were hauling an enormous percentage of their freight on their own trucks, which, think about it, right? Like over the last 18 months, think of how much they could have saved if they were buying purchase transportation as opposed to paying a 30-year union vet to do that same route when they could have been using that great driver to haul their priority service.
Right. That does make sense for sure.
So it's kind of crazy that the lack of adaptation. What do you think, Dean?
I think it is. I did a consulting job in 2001 when I was at one of the roadways terminals, and I was just struck by how inefficient the 228-foot trailer configurations were. Just the amount of handling of unloading and loading one trailer at a time just made absolutely zero sense. When I sort of raised the issue and I said, well, why don't you do things a little bit differently? The answer was shut down pretty much immediately, because he said, that's the way we do things around here and we're just not changing. But I think that's been the same with a lot of places that have been, stuck with some of their union issues. While I've got the mic, I just want to ask Nicole a question and go back to something you touched on a bit earlier. And I'm wondering if this is a sustained change or just a reaction to the current market. You mentioned about freight forwarders who are looking to consolidate, I assume, LTL loads in their own shop and then use line haul, truckload line haul. Do you think that's short term, or just could be a long term strategy? I
think it's a long term strategy. I've watched the progression of this as I've had quite a bit of freight forwarding clients, and I'm seeing it more and more hitting us and being approached that way. And they're looking to just keep expanding those types of line hauls so that way they have the control. Again, like I said, the damage side of things, that's where I step in and see quite a bit of that. There is a significant amount of damage that's happening with the line haul side of things. So this does make sense to a customer. And I think as you approach things more strategically, and there is a value to that, depending upon the commodity, I think we will see companies consistently doing this, and then from my perspective, I've seen it where customers are either utilizing a tractor trailer for 10 skids, or they are shipping one skid on a tractor trailer as well. So either it's utilizing LTL and having that delivery date that you need, or approaching those claims, or like Ken said, I'm starting to see shippers have more of a strategic approach to hold things and then actually come in cheaper than tractor trailer, but move it on a straight truck. So I think as technology evolves, routing optimization evolves even further, I think we'll start seeing more and more of this, and companies like freight forwarders will spend the money on the technology to do that.
That's really interesting. So would it follow that expediters will be sort of a continued category that, from the growth we've seen during the pandemic, that growth will continue? I
do believe so. And it's what I always say, the non-expedite expedite. It doesn't mean that it's specifically hair on fire freight, but it's going to be more tailored equipment freight in the regional areas, local areas, straight trucks making multiple deliveries. I think that will continue to grow. But then it also touches the e-commerce side. So we're going to have B2B freight mixed with B2C, I think, sometimes on the trucks expedited side.
And would hot shots fit into that category also when you say straight trucks?
Are you saying a flatbed hot shot?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't give you enough knowledge on that. I don't really service that a lot. But yes, I mean, the Sprinter van, the cube trucks, the lift gates, the 26-footers, I think we'll consistently see an uptick in this area. Yep.
That's interesting.
And so, we've talked a lot today about some operators that haven't done so well. And again, I know I'm just such a fun person. I sat down and read Old Dominion Freight Line's entire earnings release and quarterly financial statements, I'm just continually amazed at how well they operate. I mean, they are just ruthlessly efficient. Right, just even some of the remarks they made in their release about not being the first to jump in to grab some of Yellow's contract volume, to wait to see exactly what's there and maybe let some of the other carriers fail at it first, and then they'll pick it up at a higher price. It's just, I was always in awe of them in the industry when I was having to price against them at times, and just kind of sitting here now, it's like there's a reason why they are stood up as one of the most just efficient.
I have a lot of clients, Ken, that love Old Dominion. I mean, even when the market was going crazy, they were in a pinch where they had to pay more, but they knew that they could make those phone calls and Old Dominion would come through and bring the service. And so, I mean, I've seen quite a bit of clients that they're waving that flag so strong for Old Dominion and have for years.
I just remember, like, we were watching the Super Bowl a few years ago. I was still at FedEx, and I think they were advertising their home delivery and expedite service. And we're like, someone paid for a Super Bowl ad to advertise home delivery and expedite trucking. Like, what the heck? But it's like, it just makes so much sense. Some of the things that they do. So I think you do have both ends of the spectrum. Real quick, Nicole, I don't want to go into too much detail, just given how much has been written on it. But, you know, we've seen some brokerages run into some financial trouble recently. What's your outlook there? As the market starts to at least flatten and think about moving upwards for the true intermediary space?
Well, I think it's still a time of grit. So I think any company, I don't care, again, big or small, if you lose that mindset and you try to just kind of sit back and wait, I think it could be very impactful to your bottom line and potentially put you out of business. I think a lot of people stepped into this market, whether they were new to the industry or even owning their own company during the time of the pandemic. And it gave this false sense of, hey, this is easy. To me, this market is what this market has been. It's just, we're in that peak grind time. And if you want to say we had to grind in 2020, 2021, you're right. But this is a different type of grind. So it's, to me, so unfortunate to see some of these brokerages struggling, large brokerages falling or hitting bankruptcy, because I feel like that is just, people are, as an entrepreneur, right? I see what goes into that. I see the work and what happens behind the scenes, and it's sad to me to see that happen at all. But I do think we're going to see a lot of the smaller companies that lose sight of the prize and bring the service and are at the top of their game leave the space.
So I do have a question for you as an expert, because I'm out of my depth here. It didn't come in the chat today, but we've gotten a dozen of these come in through different channels. What does it mean when a broker has a pending insurance revocation on the FMCSA site?
Well, we just went through this too. It's just the time of renewal. So it could be a week that it's sitting there, and then it needs to get transferred over. Obviously you need to, as a broker, to keep taking a look at where you stand on the FMCS website and make sure that you're in good status. Because again, we changed our insurance, and again, even the bond, and it went to that pending status. And we only had, out of all the loads that we moved, we only had about 5 to 10 carriers even ask the question, even though we were in a good space. So I think it's a thing for carriers to make sure that they're looking at. And I think there's this false sense too, when you have a factoring company, that, oh, don't worry about it. We have a factoring company that's going to pay the bill. No, you should know what your customers, if you're utilizing brokers, where they stand, and how things are going, and continually run credit, everybody. You can't just run credit for someone one time and think that they're good for life. You got to really take a look at where your customers stand. If you are a trucking company utilizing brokerages that does not have a factoring company, to see where that is. And then any invoices that are lagging, you got to tap on that door pretty quick.
Yeah. So there's kind of innocent and nefarious reasons why your insurance may be pending cancel. Your bond may be pending cancellation, right?
It could be. Or it could literally be that it's just renewal time. That's what we went through. It was renewal time. And I don't know if someone didn't submit a document, but we had to get, moving right away. But again, like I said, I was surprised at how many people didn't even take notice.
So that's really good advice. It's not always bad, as I think one of the things that we've been telling folks, but it could be bad, right? It could be nothing and it could be something, right? So I think that's point one. And I think one thing too that we've gotten a lot of questions about is there's two type of factoring. I'm glad you brought this up, Nicole, because I almost forgot. I left my notepad upstairs. There's recourse and non-recourse factoring. A lot of truckers are using recourse factoring companies, which means if they don't get paid by the broker or the shipper, theoretically, they will come back to you for that invoice, right? They're not taking 3% of or 1.5% of the receivable to just to absolve all the risk, right? They're doing that to float you.
And I think a lot of companies too don't look into that, Ken. They don't. They're just looking for, okay, this is quick. I want to keep that cost down. And so you're right. They go into where there is recourse, and it really it can be very harming to a small company that's running, 3 or 4 trucks or even smaller. When all of that comes back from the factoring company, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think our partners over at OTR, just a shameless plug, they do offer non-recourse factoring in addition to, I think, their standard recourse factoring product. If you're a trucker and you don't really know, and you're given 2 options, one at a higher percentage that they take and one that has a lower percentage, typically speaking, the higher percentage is going to have some sort of non-recourse clause to come back to you. But that's just something to be mindful of, is that you're not free and clear once you factored that receivable, because we've gotten tons of reports with some of these recent bankruptcies that the factors are pulling the money back after it's been paid. So tough times for sure, no doubt about it. We'd love to not be talking about these subjects and be talking about other fun things like unable to cover trucks out of Chicago on a Friday, but that's not the environment that we're in. All right, let's wrap up. Dean, plugs.
Yeah, Day-to-Day Wednesday is tomorrow on Sales Chatter with Dan Deegan, 11 a.m. Eastern. Robert Rouse is on Landline Now on Sirius XM, 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, channel 146. Rates and Lanes podcast is on this evening with Chuck Snow and Rico Muhammad. I'll be on there with them at 7 p.m. Eastern. Also, I'll be in Kansas City this week at the CDL Life Conference. On our latest Freightbind podcast, our CMO, Jeff Hopper, is talking about fraud. Next week, we've got Seth Clevenger from Transport Topics. And on our DAT IQ show next week, we have CEO Melanie Patterson from Team Integrity talking about government contracts and keys to successfully running a small fleet. Back to you, Ken, to wrap up the show.
Nicole, how can folks get a hold of you or Candor if they need to move some freight or drive for you?
Sure. So our website is just candorexp.com. You can shoot me an email. It's just nglenn@candorexp.com, or you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. So
awesome. We love having Nicole on. Hopefully it won't be too long before we see her again. And I want to thank her for coming on at short notice.
Thank you.
I will be out in the sweltery, balmy part of the country known as Florida next week. So Dean will be doing the show alone. Maybe depending on how crazy my family's being, maybe I will go hide in a bedroom and record the show. I think I did that last year. just to catch a break in the air conditioning. So maybe I'll be on next week. But pending pending being taken over by the heat or the local fauna down there in Florida, I will be back the week after for sure. So be safe out there. Anything anyone can do to help out displaced yellow folks, I think would be greatly appreciated by all in the industry. So extend those folks a helping hand if you're able to. Again, this is a very tight-knit industry, and I think this is a time when we can all come together to help those folks out. So with that, we're going to sign off, and I hope you have a great week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.